There's a type of silence that hurts more than any scream. A silence that settles between two people and grows, month after month, year after year, until it becomes an unbridgeable abyss. I knew that silence. I lived with it for decades, and I only managed to break it when there was no more time left. When my voice was weak, my body was cold, and my courage finally found space in the desperation of someone who knows they're dying. My name was Marcus. For 43 years, I was a good husband, a good father, an ordinary man who woke up early, worked hard, came home and sat at the table with his family. For 43 years I smiled, talked about trivial things, made plans for the future. And for 43 years, I carried a secret so heavy, it bent my spine when I was alone. A secret I kept because I believed it was right, because I thought protecting those I loved was more important than my own truth. I was wrong. On that last night lying in the hospital bed, with monitors beeping softly around me, I looked into her eyes, the same eyes that had looked at me tenderly for almost half a century. And in them I saw everything I never had the courage to say. I saw the story I never told. I saw the words that died in my throat 1,000 times, suffocated by fear, by guilt, by the stupid conviction that some secrets are better buried alive. She held my hand. Her hands were always delicate, even when washing dishes, even when caring for feverish children, even when embracing me on nights I came home exhausted. And in that moment, with those hands caressing mine, I understood something brutal. I had spent my entire life by her side, and yet she never truly knew me. How is it possible to love someone for so long and remain a stranger? The room was silent except for the constant beeping of machines measuring what little was left of me. My children were in the hallway. Soon they'd come in to say goodbye, but in that instant it was just the two of us, me and her, as it always was, as it would never be again. And that's when the words finally started rising through my throat, tearing through decades of well-intentioned lies, half-truths, stories I told to protect her, but that in the end only pushed me away from her. "Diane," I said, and my voice came out so weak she needed to lean closer. "I need to tell you something. Something I've kept since before we got married. Something that changed everything, but you never knew." She frowned, confused, maybe even afraid. And as I watched that fear grow in her eyes, I thought, am I doing the right thing? Or am I just being selfish? Transferring the weight I carried alone to her now that I won't have to deal with the consequences. But it was too late to turn back. The words were already sprouting. And with them would come everything. The truth about that summer of 1982. About what really happened when I said I was traveling for work. About the secret that shaped every decision I made since then. The confession that would forever change how she saw me. The revelation I could never make. Until my last breath. I wasn't born a liar. I wasn't raised to hide truths. My father was a straightforward man, sometimes too harsh, but honest to the bone. He said a man is worth what his word is worth. And I believed that. I grew up believing truth was sacred, that lying was cowardice, that hiding who you really are was the worst kind of betrayal. So how did I become exactly that? How did I go from an idealistic young man to a man who built his entire life on an omission? When I met Diane, I was 22. She was 20. I worked as a technician at a telecommunications company, fixing phone lines, climbing poles under the scorching sun. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. I earned enough, had a small apartment, an old car that ran well, had friends, had plans, had simple dreams of building a family, a stable life. And when I first saw her in the supermarket line, with that shy smile and those eyes that seemed to see through me, I knew I wanted her to be part of it all. Our courtship was slow, careful, full of long conversations and comfortable silences. She told me about her childhood on a farm, about how she loved reading at night on the porch listening to the crickets. I told her about my siblings, about work, about my dream of one day having my own company. We talked about everything: politics, religion, music, movies. We disagreed sometimes, but always with respect, always with genuine curiosity about each other's point of view. It was easy being with her, natural, as if I'd finally found someone who spoke the same language as me. But there was a part of me I didn't show. A shadow I kept hidden, not because I wanted to deceive her, but because I was afraid. Afraid that if she knew, everything would change. Afraid that smile would turn to distrust, those eyes to judgment. So I kept it, pushed it to the back of my consciousness, convinced myself it was something from the past, that it didn't define who I was in the present, that it was better to leave certain doors closed. The marriage proposal happened on a spring night, in the same park where we had our first date. I'd had the ring in my pocket for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. When I finally knelt down, hands trembling, I saw tears in her eyes before I even said a word. "Yes," she whispered, and in that yes was contained an entire life we would build together. Children, challenges, joys, pains, a shared life. But also in that yes was the weight of what I didn't say, what I chose to hide. The first years of marriage were happy. We moved to a small house in the suburbs. Diane got pregnant with our first daughter, Olivia. Then came our son, Nathan. I worked a lot. She took care of the house and children with a dedication that moved me. We had normal couple arguments about money, about responsibilities, about which school to choose for the kids. But we always came back to each other, always forgave each other, always remembered why we chose each other. And during all that time, the secret was there. Not as something I thought about every day, but as a constant presence in the back of my mind. Sometimes when she looked at me in a specific way, when she asked, "What are you thinking?" with that sweet voice, I felt the temptation to tell her, to unburden myself, to finally be completely honest. But then came the fear again, paralyzing. What would happen if she knew? Would I lose everything? Would she forgive me? Would the children understand? And so, year after year, decade after decade, the silence deepened, until telling seemed impossible, until the lie became part of who I was. The summer of 1982 was when everything changed. Diane and I had been engaged for 6 months. The wedding was scheduled for September. She was radiant, planning every detail of the ceremony, choosing flowers, trying on dresses, and I was happy, genuinely happy, until I received that call. A call that turned my life upside down and forced me to make the hardest decision I ever made. It was a Tuesday morning when the phone rang in my apartment. An unknown number, a voice I hadn't heard in 4 years. "Marcus," she said, and my blood ran cold. It was Vanessa, the woman I had loved before Diane, the woman who had left without explanations, leaving only a letter saying she needed to find herself, that she wasn't ready for commitments. I had suffered, yes, but I had moved on, or at least I thought I had. "I need to see you," Vanessa said, and there was urgency in her voice. "It's important, please." I should have said no, should have hung up the phone, told Diane about the call, kept everything transparent. But curiosity overtook me. What did she want after so long? Why now, just when I was about to get married? I agreed to meet her, told Diane I needed to travel for work for 3 days. The first real lie I told her, the first of many. We met at a cafe in the neighboring city. Vanessa was different. Thinner, with deep dark circles, hands trembling as she held the coffee cup. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I'm sick, Marcus. Cancer. Advanced stage. The doctors gave me 6 months, maybe a year." I felt the world spin. All the words I'd prepared, all the questions about why she had left, evaporated. All I could do was hold her hand and let her cry. But then came the second bombshell. "I have a son, Marcus. Our son. He's 3 years old. I was pregnant when I left, but I didn't know. When I found out, I was already far away, trying to rebuild my life alone. I thought I could handle it. Thought I didn't need anyone. But now," she stopped, swallowing her cry. "Now I'm going to die, and he'll be alone. I have no family. I have no one, only you." The boy was named Lucas. She showed me pictures. Dark hair like mine, brown eyes, the same stubborn chin I saw in the mirror every day. My son. A son I didn't know existed. A son who now suddenly was my responsibility. Vanessa begged me. She wasn't asking for money, wasn't asking us to be a couple again. She was only asking that I take care of Lucas when she was gone, that I adopt him, that I give him the family she couldn't give. I came home 3 days later, destroyed inside. Diane received me with a smile, asking how the trip had been. I said it had been productive, that I was tired, that I needed to rest. And then for weeks I pretended normalcy while inside I waged a war. How would I tell her? How would I explain I had a son from another relationship? That Vanessa was dying and I needed to take in this boy? The wedding was 2 months away. The families were already involved. Everything was planned. Telling now would possibly mean losing Diane, would mean painful explanations, distrust, maybe the end of everything we'd built. So I made a choice. A terrible choice. I chose silence. I married Diane in September 1982 as planned. It was a beautiful day. She was radiant in her white dress, smiling as she walked toward the altar. Our friends and family filled the church, all happy for us. When I looked in her eyes and spoke my vows, each word seemed to weigh tons on my tongue. In joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. I said all this while knowing there was a huge secret between us. A son, a dying woman. Her responsibility I still didn't know how to assume. The honeymoon was a carefully rehearsed farce. We went to a small cabin in the mountains. Diane was happy, making plans for our future, talking about how many children we'd have, about the house we'd buy. And I smiled, agreed, made love to her while my mind was miles away, thinking about Lucas, thinking about Vanessa wasting away in some hospital, thinking about how I'd be able to reconcile those two completely opposite realities. 2 months after the wedding, Vanessa died. I found out through a letter she'd left with her lawyer, along with adoption papers already prepared. I went to the funeral alone, telling Diane it was an urgent work conference. I saw the casket being lowered. I saw Lucas, that small boy with confused eyes, being held by a social worker. And I knew the moment of truth had arrived. I needed to make a final decision. Abandon my biological son, or face Diane with the truth. I chose a third option. The most cowardly option of all. I found an adoptive family for Lucas through Vanessa's lawyer, a couple who couldn't have children, good people living in another state. I signed the papers, agreed to pay monthly support through an anonymous account. I demanded only one thing, that he never know my name, that he grow up thinking his biological parents had died, that there was no one else. I abandoned him, my own son, and I did it to protect my new family, my marriage, my carefully constructed life. But the consequences of that choice began immediately. I came home different. Diane noticed. "You're distant," she'd say. "Did something happen?" I denied it, made excuses about work stress, about tiredness. But the truth was something had broken inside me. Every time I looked at her, I thought of Lucas. Every time she talked about having children, I saw that boy's face being taken away by the social worker. Guilt was like a slow poison spreading through my body, contaminating every moment of happiness. When Olivia was born a year later, I held my daughter in my arms and cried. Diane thought they were tears of joy, but I was crying because I thought of another baby, another son I'd held for only a few minutes in the hospital before signing the adoption papers. Olivia had my eyes. Lucas did too. And while I promised myself I'd be the best father in the world to Olivia, to Nathan, who would come later, a voice in my head constantly reminded me, "You were already the worst father possible once. How can you trust yourself now?" The following years were marked by this duality. On the outside, I was the perfect husband, the dedicated father, the man everyone admired. Inside, I carried a weight that never diminished. Each of Lucas's birthdays that passed, I wondered where he was, if he was happy, if the adoptive family was taking good care of him. Every time Nathan called me Dad with that unconditional love of children, I felt a stab of guilt, because somewhere, another boy was growing up without ever knowing me. And all of this because of my cowardice. 15 years passed. 15 years since I signed those papers. 15 years since I last saw Lucas. And slowly, very slowly, I learned to live with the weight. Not that it had disappeared. It never disappeared. But I learned to push it to a corner of my consciousness, to function despite it. Olivia was 16. Nathan was 13. My company had grown. Diane and I had a good life. Not perfect, but good. And I almost believed I'd made the right choice. That time had proven keeping the secret protected everyone I loved. It was on a Saturday morning that everything changed again. I was in the garden, trimming the roses Diane loved so much when I heard the phone ring inside the house. She answered. A few seconds later, I heard her voice calling me, strangely tense. "Marcus, it's for you." Someone named Henry Patterson, from the law firm Miller and Associates. My heart raced. That was the name of the lawyer who had handled Lucas's adoption. Why would he be calling after so long? His voice was professional, but loaded with news I wasn't prepared to hear. "Mr. Marcus, I regret to inform you there was an accident. Lucas's adoptive parents died in a car accident 3 weeks ago. The young man is now 18 years old and is temporarily under state custody. He recently discovered he was adopted and is seeking information about his biological parents. According to the documents you specified, you should never be contacted, but..." He paused. "But circumstances have changed. The young man is alone, and legally you're still listed as the biological father. We need to discuss options." I hung up the phone with trembling hands. Diane was in the kitchen, looking at me curiously. "Who was it?" she asked. And for the first time in 15 years, I felt a wave of hope. Hope that maybe, finally, I could fix my mistake. Lucas was alone. He needed me. Maybe the universe was giving me a second chance. Maybe I could bring him home, introduce him to Diane, explain everything, and finally redeem myself. The idea was scary, but also liberating. Carrying the secret for so long had exhausted me. Telling the truth, facing the consequences, but finally being honest almost seemed like a gift. It was about an old client, I lied, still without courage to tell, but already planning how I would. Nothing important. But that night, while Diane slept beside me, I lay awake, imagining what it would be like. I imagined Lucas entering our house for the first time. I imagined introducing him to Olivia and Nathan as the older brother they never knew. Yes, there would be anger, confusion, maybe even Diane would think about leaving me. But with time, with honesty, maybe we could become a real family. Maybe I could finally look in the mirror without feeling disgusted with myself. For 3 days I carried that hope. I called the lawyer back, asked for more information about Lucas. He was fine, physically, emotionally shaken by the loss of his adoptive parents, confused about his identity, but he was a good kid. Had graduated high school, wanted to study engineering. I heard all this and felt pride. My son. Even without ever having raised him, I felt proud of him. I scheduled a meeting with the lawyer for the following week. I decided that before that meeting I'd tell Diane everything, prepare the ground, face the storm, and then, finally, truly meet my son. But then, on the 4th night, something happened that completely destroyed that hope. Olivia walked into the room while I was on the phone with the lawyer, discussing details about Lucas. She heard fragments of the conversation. "Your biological son. Adoption. 18 years old." I saw her face change, saw the confusion, then understanding, then betrayal in her eyes. When I hung up, she stared at me, tears running down her face. "Dad," she said, and her voice was broken. "You have another son? You've been lying to us all this time?" And in that moment, hope died, because I realized that no matter how noble my intention to fix things, the damage was already done. And it was much bigger than I ever imagined. The explosion was worse than any nightmare I could have imagined. Olivia told Nathan everything before I could even explain. When Diane came home that night, both were sitting in the living room waiting. Closed faces, eyes red from crying so much. "They have something to tell you," Olivia said, her voice cutting like glass. And then she left the room, slamming her bedroom door so hard the wall shook. Diane looked at me, confused, scared. And Nathan, my boy, my youngest son, who always looked at me as if I were a hero, began to speak in a voice I barely recognized. "Dad has another son," he said, the words coming out choppy. "A son he abandoned. A son who existed all this time, and that he hid from all of us." I saw the world collapse in Diane's eyes. I saw the exact moment when 43 years of marriage, of trust, of love, shattered like porcelain falling to the floor. She didn't scream, didn't cry immediately, just looked at me, and in that look was something much worse than anger. There was disbelief, as if she were looking at a stranger. I tried to explain. God knows I tried. I sat at the kitchen table and told everything. Vanessa, the call, the diagnosis, Lucas, the decision to give him up for adoption because I was afraid of losing Diane. The words came out of my mouth but sounded empty, pathetic. Every justification I gave only made things worse. You deceived me for 43 years, Diane said, her voice low but trembling with contained emotion. You looked me in the eyes every day and lied. You made marriage vows knowing you had a son somewhere. And you chose to protect us from the truth instead of trusting me, instead of giving me the chance to choose too. Nathan left the room without saying anything more. I heard the front door slam. He went to sleep at a friend's house that night. Olivia locked herself in her room and didn't want to talk to me. And Diane, my Diane, sat on the couch and finally cried. Not a loud, dramatic cry, but a silent, destroying cry. The cry of someone who realizes the life they built was based on a lie. I tried to approach, touch her, but she pulled away as if my touch burned her. No, she whispered. Don't touch me. I don't know who you are anymore. The following weeks were a living hell. Diane moved to the guest room. Conversations were minimal, functional, cold. Nathan barely looked at me. Olivia oscillated between anger and sadness, sometimes screaming that I had destroyed our family, other times crying because the image she had of me had been an illusion. I had gone from hero to villain in a matter of days, and the worst part is I couldn't blame them. They were right in every accusation, in every look of betrayal. But the deepest pain came when I tried to talk about Lucas. He needs me, I told Diane one night. He's alone. His adoptive parents died. I thought maybe we could... She cut me off with a bitter laugh. You want to bring him here? Now? After destroying our trust, you want us to accept a stranger in our house? A son you abandoned but now conveniently want to rescue. You're delusional, Marcus. And she was right. I was. Because the painful truth was, I couldn't have both. Couldn't rescue Lucas without completely losing Diane and my other children. Couldn't fix one mistake without amplifying another. I called the lawyer and said I couldn't take Lucas in, that he should continue under state custody until he turned 18 and became independent, that I'd continue paying financial support anonymously, but there was no room for him in my life. Saying those words, I felt something inside me die. I was abandoning my son for the second time. And this time, there was no excuse of protecting anyone. It was pure cowardice. It was the choice of a man who, when forced to decide between two wrongs, chose the easier path. And in that moment, I hit rock bottom, because I finally understood a devastating truth. I wasn't the man I thought I was. I never was. The months that followed were of deafening silence. Diane still lived in the same house, but we were strangers sharing a space. She went to work, came back, prepared dinner, slept in the guest room. There were no screams, no dramatic confrontations, just a polite coldness that hurt more than any fight. Nathan had gone to college in another state, clearly running from the tension at home. Olivia graduated and moved to an apartment with friends. Both called Diane regularly. Me, rarely. It was on a winter night, alone in the empty living room, that something broke inside me in a different way. It wasn't pain, it wasn't despair. It was clarity. Brutal, relentless clarity. I spent my entire life believing I was protecting the people I loved. But the truth was I was protecting myself, protecting my image, my comfort zone, my perfect and carefully constructed life. Lucas wasn't abandoned to protect Diane. He was abandoned because I was too cowardly to face the consequences of my choices. And now, 40 years later, I was paying the price of a cowardice I never acknowledged. I started writing. I don't know exactly why. Maybe because I needed to organize my thoughts. Maybe because I was finally ready to truly look at what I'd done. I wrote about Vanessa, about the moment I received her call, about holding Lucas in my arms for the first and last time. I wrote about every lie I told Diane, every time I looked away when she asked if I was okay. I wrote about Lucas's birthdays, I imagined, over the years, wondering if he was happy, if he was healthy, if he ever thought about the biological parents he never knew. And as I wrote, something changed. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't forgiveness. It was acceptance. Acceptance that I had failed in ways I could no longer deny or justify, but also acceptance that there was still time, not to fix the past. That was impossible, but to finally be honest. To stop living in fear of consequences and start living with the truth, however painful it was. I was 71. How many years did I have left? 10? 5? 1? Didn't matter. What mattered was I didn't want to die as I lived, hiding behind lies. I searched for Lucas. It took weeks, but I finally found him through public records. He was living in Seattle, working as a civil engineer, married with a young daughter. I discovered all this without ever making contact. Several times I picked up the phone, dialed the number, but froze before completing the call. What would I say? Hello, I'm your biological father who abandoned you twice. But then one night I drank a little courage and called. He answered. I said my name. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I know who you are, Lucas finally said. His voice was calm, controlled, but I could feel the tension in it. When the documents were opened after my adoptive parents died, I found out everything. Found out you knew of my existence, that you chose to give me up for adoption, that you paid for me to be raised by strangers while you built your own family. Each word was a stab, but they were stabs I deserved. Why are you calling now? Guilty conscience? Or just want to feel better before you die? I swallowed the cry that wanted to come out. I have no excuses, I said, my voice trembling. I made terrible choices, cowardly, selfish, and you have every right to hate me. I'm not calling to ask for forgiveness. I'm not calling to try to build a relationship that never existed. I just wanted you to know the truth. All of it. Not the lies I told myself for 40 years, but the real truth. That I knew of your existence and chose my comfort over you, and that I lived every day since then carrying the weight of that choice. You deserve to know who I really am. Not the father who abandons and disappears, but the cowardly man who chooses the easier path always. Lucas didn't hang up. He stayed silent for a long time, then said something that surprised me. I had a good life. My adoptive parents loved me. They gave me everything, and I'm furious with you, yes. But I also understand you were scared, that you were young, that you made a bad choice in an impossible moment. He paused. I don't know if I'll ever want to meet you in person. I don't know if I can forgive, but thank you for calling, for finally being honest. And then he hung up. And I sat there, in the silence of the room, and for the first time in decades, I cried, not from despair, but from relief, because finally, I had begun to pay my debt to the truth. It took me 3 years to gather courage to tell Diane everything. 3 years living in that silent house, working on my internal redemption, trying to be honest at least with myself. I wrote letters I never sent, rehearsed conversations that never happened. And then my body started failing. First was the tiredness, then the pains, then the diagnosis that changes everything. Pancreatic cancer, terminal stage, 6 months, maybe less. And suddenly, the time I thought I had disappeared. There was no more luxury of waiting for the right moment. The right moment was now, or never. It was she who came back to the master bedroom when she found out. Not from love, I knew that, but from compassion. Because despite everything, despite the lies and betrayals, Diane was good. Better than I ever was. She took care of me as my body wasted away, took me to medical appointments, administered the medications, held my hand on nights of unbearable pain. But there was a distance in her eyes that no physical proximity could diminish. She was there as a nurse, as a companion of decades, not as a wife, not as the woman who once loved me without reservations. In the last week, when doctors said there was nothing more to do, I was hospitalized. Olivia and Nathan came. They stayed in the room, talked to me about childhood memories, about the good times. They tried in their way to make peace before the end. I thanked them, apologized, said I loved them more than any words could express. And they cried, hugged me, forgave me as much as they could. But when they left the room that night, leaving me alone with Diane, I knew there was one last confession, the most important one, the one I should have made on our wedding day. Diane, I began, my voice weak but determined. I need to tell you something I've kept since before we got married. And then, with the last strength I had left, I told everything. Not the edited version she already knew, but the whole truth. I told her about the fear I felt that summer of 1982, about holding Lucas in my arms and feeling devastating love mixed with absolute terror. I told her about every time I almost confessed during our marriage, every moment the words reached my throat but didn't come out. I told her about the call 3 years ago, about finally talking to Lucas, about accepting that he hated me but feeling relief for finally having been honest with him. She listened to everything in silence. Tears ran down her face, but she didn't interrupt me. And when I finished, when there was nothing more to say, she stared at me for a long time. "Why now?" she finally asked. "Why only now when you're dying? Do you finally tell me everything?" And there was no anger in her voice, just tiredness, deep sadness, the pain of a life shared but never fully honest. "Because I was a coward," I replied, each word costing me immense effort. "Because I was always more afraid of losing you than I had courage to trust you. And now in the end, I understand I lost you anyway. Not from telling, but from not having told 40 years ago. I robbed you of the chance to choose, to decide if you wanted to marry a man with a son from another relationship. I robbed you of decades of honesty, and that is unforgivable, I know. But I needed you to know that despite all the lies, despite all the cowardice, I always loved you. Every day, truly. And my greatest regret isn't having abandoned Lucas. It's having lived a lie with you." Diane held my hand, and in that touch I felt everything. The love we had, the betrayal we carried, the life that could have been different if I had been brave. "I loved you too," she said, and the past tense in that phrase shattered me. "But you're right. You robbed me of choice. And that changes everything, even now. Even at the end." She leaned in, kissed my forehead. "I'll stay here until the end, because I made a vow. Until death do us part. But Marcus, you'll never know what it would have been like if you'd trusted me. If you'd given me the chance to love you completely, with all your flaws, with all your past. That's what you lost. And there's no more time to recover it." The machines started beeping slower. I felt my body shutting down part by part, and with my last strength I squeezed her hand. "I hope in the next life," I whispered. "I'm brave enough to love you honestly from the first day." She smiled through tears, a sad smile but real. And it was that smile I took with me when I closed my eyes for the last time. Not complete forgiveness, not total redemption, but the truth. Finally, painfully, the truth. There's a type of courage we don't realize is missing until it's too late. It's not the courage to face dangers, to fight physical battles, to overcome external obstacles. It's the hardest courage of all, the courage to be honest, to take off the mask and say, "This is me, with all my flaws, with all my past, with all my fears." Marcus spent his entire life believing he was protecting those he loved by hiding the truth. But in the end, he discovered that the greatest damage doesn't come from painful truths we tell. It comes from truths we keep, that rot inside us and poison everything they touch. There's a brutal difference between secrets that protect and secrets that destroy. Some silences are acts of love. Others are acts of cowardice disguised as protection. Marcus convinced himself for decades he was in the first group, when he was always in the second. He didn't keep the secret about Lucas to spare Diane from pain. He kept it to spare himself the discomfort of honesty. And in doing so, he built a marriage on sand foundations. No matter how beautiful the building was on the outside, it was always destined to collapse when the first storm arrived. Time is the universe's gentlest cruelty. It gives us chances one after another to fix our mistakes. But it also charges a price for each wasted chance. Marcus had thousands of opportunities to tell the truth. 1,000 mornings he could have woken Diane and said, "I need to tell you something." 1,000 nights he could have broken the silence. But he chose to wait, chose to postpone, chose to believe there would always be a more convenient tomorrow, until there wasn't. And he learned the hardest lesson. There's no redemption without time. There's no fixing without opportunity. And when we finally find courage, sometimes it's just to discover we arrived too late. But perhaps the deepest lesson from Marcus's story isn't about what he lost. It's about what he never had the chance to discover. He'll never know if Diane would have forgiven him that summer of 1982. He'll never know if she would have chosen to stay, help raise Lucas, build a bigger and more complicated family, but honest. Maybe she would have left him. Maybe the marriage would never have happened. But also maybe, just maybe, she would have been stronger than he imagined. Maybe her love was big enough to embrace the whole truth. By not trusting her, by not giving her that choice, Marcus didn't just lie. He underestimated. And that, of all betrayals, was perhaps the deepest. Marcus's story ended in a hospital bed, with late confessions and tears of regret. But it doesn't have to be like that for you. Because if there's anything we can learn from his mistake, it's this. The secrets we carry seem to protect us but actually imprison us. Every unspoken truth is a wall we build between us and the people we love. And the longer these walls stand, the harder it becomes to tear them down. Until we live in fortresses of loneliness, surrounded by people but completely alone, because no one really knows who we are. If you're keeping something that weighs on your heart, something you're afraid to confess, something you believe protects those you love by keeping secret, stop, breathe, and ask yourself, am I really protecting someone? Or am I just protecting my own image, my own comfort, my own idealized version of who I am? Because the truth, however painful, always frees more than it imprisons. And the people who truly love us deserve the chance to love who we really are. Not the edited version, not the carefully constructed character, but the real person, flawed, complicated, imperfect, but honest. Marcus died with the bitter relief of finally having told his truth, but he died without ever knowing what could have been, without ever having experienced the love that comes from being completely known and still accepted. That was his greatest loss. And it doesn't have to be yours, because while there's time, while there's life, while there are people you love and who love you, there's a chance to choose courage over fear, truth over comfort, vulnerability over the illusion of control. And maybe, just maybe, discover that the people we love are stronger, more compassionate, more capable of forgiving than we ever gave them credit for. In the end, we'll all die with regrets, but may they not be the regrets of unspoken words, buried truths, love that was never completely honest. Because the confession you can't make until your last breath is the one you should have made on the first. And each day of silence is a day stolen from the possibility of being truly loved, truly known, truly free.